And yeah, there's Replit made a couple changes that they pushed this week to the design, but it's pretty much the same thing. This button to close the files is up here instead of like in here, and it's got all these other links down here now instead of on this left panel. But other than that, it's pretty much the same thing. Um, so yeah, we're in Tone Sequencer with Harmony. Let me put a link to this into the voice chat. And let's go to the, um, oh, now I actually need to use the settings. Where are the settings? There we go. And let's turn the font size to huge and then close settings. There we go. And so to get started, we actually need to put something into our HTML page. So we already have our tone library and we have our P5 library. And now we're going to use another library, which is like a pretty nice JavaScript library called Tonal, Tonal.js. There's a few libraries that do kind of similar things to this, but it basically does music theory for us. So instead of having to know like, what notes go into a chord or what's the fifth of a note of a key or something like that. Um, this library will kind of do a lot of that stuff for us. It's a little tricky just because you do have to have some basic understanding of music theory to know like how it works and how to manipulate it. So we're not going to use like anything too crazy, but we're just going to use it to make some chords. Because creating chords, you have to know a lot of notes and you have to know which notes go into a chord. And unless you've studied music, that can be pretty challenging. So we're going to make that a little bit easier by using this library. And so the library itself, it's not as big of a library as like P5 or 3JS or Tone. Like there's not, there's a good amount of support for it. You can see there's where's the contributors? There's 44 contributors. So there's a lot of people involved in the project, but it's not quite as robust as some of the other libraries that we use. So I haven't noticed any big issues with it, but one thing is there's not quite as much documentation. Like when we want to learn about tone, we can go to the Tone website and we can check out the API, and there's like a ton of examples. So there's a lot of things that we can look at to help us understand how tone works. With Tonal, the library that we're going to look at today, which unfortunately sounds very similar to Tone, but it's called Tonal. There's some documentation for this, but it's not super robust. So for example, most of the documentation is just built into the GitHub page here. So like when I want to look at notes, I click on this, and this is actually the code. So it actually takes me to the page that has the code for this module. Tonal is organized into these different packages. So there's packages for chord, um, key, uh, note, pitch, scale, all these different things having to do with music theory. And when we go into one of these packages, we'll see the code that's related to that package. Like I could go through and read this code if I wanted to see how it works. But then it also has some documentation in here. So it shows you all of the functions related to this package and what they do and how to use them. So there is actually pretty good documentation, but there's not. It's kind of organized inside the code itself rather than on a separate website with a menu and things like that. So it's a little bit harder to navigate. But that's okay. We're just going to use it to generate some chords, and so we don't have to worry too much about having everything set up exactly correctly. But anyway, if we want to put this into our project, there's an easy way to do it using this script tag here. So once we add this script tag, just like P5 and 3JS, once I add that script tag into my HTML page, I'll be able to reference tonal. So if I copy this and go back to my HTML, it doesn't really matter what order this goes into, but I'm just going to copy this and paste it into here. And so now I'll be able to access Tonal, and everything in Tonal, it's very similar to the organization of both 3JS and the Tone library that we've used in the past. So things are kind of organized inside of this thing called Tonal, and we can access the different components with dot notation for these different objects. So we can get different keys, and look at things inside of those keys or notes or other things that we need to use. So now that we've got it in here, let's go back to our script page. And what we're going to do is kind of set this up so that we can get a set of chords from a key and then use those chords to play a composition instead of just a single melody. And so I won't go into a ton of this right now, but just to give a little bit example of what I mean when I talk about chords. And if you've played, guitar or piano before, you'll have a good sense of what I mean. But so in the last couple lessons, we've just been looking at melodies. A melody is a sequence of notes, so the notes are played, one after the other. Um, I forget what we were playing, like uh, uh, the Twinkle Twinkle Little Star song, which is like. Okay, so that's a melody. All the notes are played one after the other in a sequence. When we add harmony into that, we're going to start playing what's called chords. And so a chord is a series of notes that are in a scale that relate to the current note of that scale. So it gets a little complicated, but if we look at the scale that Twinkle Twinkle is in, it's a C major scale, so it's all the white keys. And so if you just play the notes in that scale one after the other, it's just. But a chord is not all of the notes in the scale. A chord is a subset of those notes that kind of make sort of the main part of each component of the scale. So for a C major chord, the notes are the third and the fifth. So it would be C, E, and G. So we can hear, that kind of sounds like a major chord has like a particular type of sound to it. There's also, if we flat the third, we'll get a minor chord. And that has like a different feeling to it. And so a lot of music is kind of like using those relationships between notes to evoke different feelings through melody or through harmony. So harmony is just when we play notes at the same time, and there's a lot of rules that we kind of use to guide what notes we play together. And there's a lot of different ways to think about this, but chords is kind of a simple way to do it. If we want to make there's a major chord in C. If we want to make a major 7 chord, we can add the 7 on here, which is going to sound a little more articulated. And, there's other voicings, like if we play a dominant 7 chord, that has kind of like a country twang feel to it. And then as we go through our scale, different notes in our scale have different chords that are associated with them. So that's where it gets kind of complicated. So for example, the third in my C major is E, but if I play an E chord, if I want the chords of E, because it's in a C major scale, those notes are not going to be exactly the same because they have to fit in the C major scale. So the E in C major is going to be something like that. And so depending on what scale, what key we're in, major or minor, or there's other keys as well, and then what note we are inside the key, the notes that we use to form a chord are going to be different. And, since there's a lot of work that goes into that, we can just use this library to figure it out for us. So let's look at how we do that real quick. I'm going to go back to my code and I'm probably going to get rid of a lot of the stuff in here to get started. Uh, but let's see, let's just fix our comment up here. So we're actually still going to be using the loop. I'm just going to change this to tone plus tonal harmony demo. And then let's put a link to tonal in here. So we have a reference to it. Okay. And so let's just like log some stuff so we can see what tonal really looks like. Excuse me. So let's turn some stuff off. Let's get rid of our sequence for now. Let's just make this empty. Um, and let's, we can leave some of this stuff here. Let's just simplify this a little bit. Uh, and then we'll go into setup. And this is where we will do some stuff with tonal just to kind of get started. But let's see. Yeah, because we want to use random. Actually, I'm just going to do this at the top for now just to make it easier. So we'll just log some stuff and then we'll incorporate it into the rest of our sketch. So actually, I want to open this in a new window. Oops.
Professor, Professor, so the tonal will let me just write, like if I want to do a G major,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I just write G major and has like a variable for it or something inside the library, or do I need to write the notes that are inside the library?
It's going to give us the notes, and then we have to convert that into notes that P5 or sorry, Tone can understand. So there's like two steps to it, but I'm going to go over how to do that. Um, Okay, so let's see. So the first thing we want to do is set our key. And we could randomize our key if we got like a random note. Uh, but let's just use C for now, and we'll use a random note later. So what I can do is say let key. And the way I want to do this is I want to say tonal.key. So these are two objects, so they're both capitalized. And then we're just going to get the key that we want. So let's do get, and then we'll do C. So we're just going to stick with C for now. And then we're going to log the key and see what's in there. And the key generally in music just refers to like the set of notes that the melody and chords are written in so that they work together nicely. So the key could be C or C minor, it could be A, it could be any of our notes. Um, so I'm gonna move this over here. Let's get rid of that actually because the console in there is not very useful. Okay. Oh, it says tonal.key.get is not a function. Let's take a look at the API and see what we want. Oh, we have to say if it's major or minor. Yeah, because it treats minor keys differently. So let's stick with major for now. So we'll just say major key. So we'll say major key in C. And so let's run that. And I'm going to get rid of my other logs that are happening down here so we don't have to see all that stuff. Okay. So this is what my key looks like. It's got a lot of information in it. We don't need all of this, but I'll just talk a little bit about what's in here to start. So there's different chord scales. These are the scales that are associated with all the different chords in this key. So C major, obviously it's in we said major uh, key of C. Then the six is going to be your minor key. And then these other terms that are a little bit more obscure, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian, Locrian, these are the other scales that are not strictly major or minor, that have the C major notes in them for the different parts of the scales. So you could use this to get your chords, but we probably will ignore this for now. Here's our chords. This is what we're going to use because it's a little bit easier in terms of the notation. And so we're not going to get D Dorian. So even though D Dorian would be more specific to this key, D minor 7 will give us the notes that we need to play the key correctly. So these are our kind of like main chords: C major 7, D minor 7, E minor 7, F major 7, G7, A minor 7, and B minor 7 flat 5. So those are the chords that are associated with the major key of C. And so if we change that key, if I change this to, like D or something like that, or we could randomize it if we wanted to, then we'll get different chords. But you can see it follows the same pattern: D major, E minor, F sharp minor, G major, and A7, and then B minor and C sharp minor flat 5. So it's the same sequence of chords, but with different notes. So we can get whatever chords we want. We just change the note that we want to start with. The rest of the stuff in here we don't really need to deal with. We could use the scale if we wanted to generate a melody along with the chord. So this scale will take kind of the note out of the chords and just give us the main note for each chord. So that could be useful. The intervals, this is a little harder to explain, but it just basically tells you the intervals from the tonic or the main note, which is C, to each note. So 1, for example, is like it is just that note. And then the P stands for perfect. It means that it doesn't change. The M means that it's in major. It could be a lowercase m, in which case it would be minor. So you can see like the 4 and the 5 don't change between major and minor, whereas the 2, the 3, the 6, and the 7 do. So again, we don't really need to worry about that. And yeah, we can see there's a bunch of other information in here that we're going to ignore. But what we really want here is our chords. So let's save our chords. So after we get the key, let's say let chords equal key.chords. And so now we have some chords that we can choose when we want to play our composition. So let's, instead of generating random notes, in this case, we can generate random chords. So I'm going to leave these functions as is, but we can add some more functions as well. And one thing that you'll notice is that these chords do not have, and these scales, they don't have our octaves. So we're going to have to choose octaves to associate with our chords and our scales. We can do that randomly, or we can choose an octave. So let's go ahead and add that function in. We can say get random chord. And so now we can do something very similar here, except we can say constant chord equals random chords. And then we'll have to associate the octaves later. So for now, let's just return this chord, and then we'll figure out there's a few different ways that we can associate the octaves, but we'll worry about that in a little bit. So then we have our same octaves. We don't need these notes anymore, so let's just delete these notes. We have our same durations. I'm actually going to get rid of this one n because I think we can simplify this a little bit. We still need a sequence and an index, and then our display note we can set to the first note in our chord. So even though, or we could display all the notes, but let's just set it to the first note in our chord as we go through. Okay, so then let's go to setup. So one thing that we do have to change is a typical FM synth cannot play more than one note at once. If we go look at tone and go to examples and go to FM synth, you can see, I have this piano here, and I guess I don't think it's connected to my keyboard. Oh yeah, it is. Okay. So notice when I try to play two notes at the same time, it just changes to whatever note I played second. So in tone, our regular synths are just are monosynths, meaning they can only synthesize one note at a time. If we want to play more than one note at a time, we can use a sampler. If I plug in a sampler, it'll play multiple notes. But what I'm going to use instead, since we haven't talked about it, is a polysynth. A polysynth is actually just a collection of one of our other types of synths. So you can actually put in a different synth as the argument to the polysynth. I'm just going to use a regular polysynth just for now. So in the polysynth, if I play two notes at the same time, now we can actually hear our chord and our harmonies. So we just have to go back to our code, and all we have to do is replace FM synth with polysynth. And now instead of playing a single note, we'll play an array or list of notes. So for our tone loop, we can keep that the same, and our transport, we can keep this the same as well. And then for our sequence, let's add some random chords into our sequence instead. And let's give this a number. Instead of having 8 down here, let's put this up here. So let's say let sequence num, and we'll set it to 8 here. It's better to have a global variable for this. So let's call this sequence num. And so instead of a random note, let's do a chord. So we'll say constant chord is get random chord. And so now our beat will contain a duration and a chord, and we'll push the beat onto the sequence. And then we have our rests. I may want to play with this later. I feel like it would be good to have actually just random numbers of rests. Maybe we can do that actually. Maybe we'll just put, let's just put some random rests in here. So let's just say after each note, we'll say let num rests equals, let's just say random between 0, so we can have 0 rests up to, let's just say 3. I think this will be a little more interesting. We'll get some rests that don't necessarily match the sequence, the note before it. Okay, so we have our sequence set up, and now we have to change how we play this. So this is the most kind of tricky part of this part of adding in chords. So let's go to our play loop. And so now out of our sequence, we're no longer going to get a note, we're going to get a chord. And so we can still say if chord. So we still have the chance for a null. And actually, we need to change this to chord as well. Um, so we still have a chance for a null here. So if we don't get a chord, we don't want to play anything. Let's just set the display note to the first note in our chord. But we haven't actually looked at what this chord looks like. So let's do that first. And we're going to turn the synth off for a second. So once we get our chord, let's log our chord. So let's say console.log chord. And let's take a look. So we should see our chords coming out when we play this. And we're not seeing anything. Let's see. Let's see if I missed something. Let's console.log our sequence just to make sure. Okay, so we start getting a sequence. We do get a nice chord and a nice duration. So let's see. When I press the mouse, we're starting the loop. Okay, so let's console.log. Let's just say loop. Or let's, yeah, and we can look at the index. Huh. I'm getting a warning, but I don't think that should stop anything. Let's see. I'm not getting any errors either. Um, huh. That's a little weird. I'm not really sure why that's not working. Um, let's see. Let's just try playing a random note. Huh. Okay. I don't think I changed anything else. I don't know why that's not working. Let's see. See if my other tone project works. Okay, let's go back to sequencer 2. See if this works. Okay, that still works. Huh. Well, that's not good. I don't know what the deal is. It looks pretty much the same to me. Let's see. Okay, hopefully I won't have to start this again, but let's see. I wonder what, oops. Huh. I wonder what could have changed.
First, say you don't have any notes to play because it's not a variable when you tried to put in notes before.
Yeah, that's not the issue though. The issue is that the tone doesn't seem to be running at all. Um, and I don't think I changed anything that would have made it stop running. What I'm going to do is just fork this one again, and I'll copy some crap over, and hopefully it'll just start working. It, I'm probably just missing something obvious, but I'm not getting any errors, so I don't have anywhere to start debugging. So I'm just going to go back here and let's, okay, so I'm going to fork this sequencer and call this tone with sequencer with harmony 2. And okay, so let's, okay, so that works. So what I'm going to do is just copy over this script and paste it in here. And let's see, does it still work? Yes. Okay, then we'll go over to the script and let's copy um, this stuff. And let's see. Okay, still works. Let's copy this guy and delete my sequence. Okay, that still works. And let's see, let's put in sequence number here. Okay, still working. And then the last bit was the get random chord. Let's throw this in here. Okay, that still works. And so now we just say const chord get random chord and put the chord in here instead. And now I'm just going to copy over my rests. chord here. And this is now chord and chord. And let's take these out for a second and just console.log chord. Okay, now it's working. I have no idea what's different, but it works now. So that's weird, but there must be some typo that I can't see at the moment. So anyway, let's just open this up again. And so now we can see, okay, of course, now I open it over here and it doesn't work. Okay, so there's something wrong with the browser preview. Okay, so we'll just have to stick with this crappy console for now. Let's make it a little bit bigger. Okay, now it's, huh. Now it's breaking again. Okay, let's just try. Shit. Okay, sorry about this. I don't really know why it's not working all of a sudden. Um, but let's see. Okay, now it's working. Okay, something weird is going on with Replit. Uh, I don't really know what it is, but let's just try to get as far as we can. Anyway, so we can see these chords coming out now. So this is coming out of our loop right here. Let's get rid of some of these extra notes from last time, since we know what this stuff does now. So it may be kind of hard to see. It's kind of small in here, but you can see the chords that are coming out. E minor 7, D major 7, G major 7. These are all the chords that are part of our key. So again, we're getting this key, and then we're getting the chords from that key. And then instead of pushing notes onto our sequence, we're pushing chords onto the sequence. And so the thing that's cool here is we can still just play the melody. We can still just play the notes from the chord, but now we can play the whole chord itself, or we can play components of the chord. But we have to get the notes out of the chord. So that's the next step. So you can see the chords that are being played here. And let's actually assign the display note to the chord. So instead of display note equals note, I'm going to say display note equals chord. And oh, we can't see it though because it's kind of far down. So let's move our display note up a little bit. So now we can see the chord that's being generated from our sequence. And so now we have to play the chord. And so to do that, we need to format our notes a little bit. There's a couple different ways to do this. So it does require a couple steps, but let's see if we can figure out a simple way to do it. So I'm going to collapse all these extra functions again. And oh yeah, I wanted to get rid of this duration again. Okay. Okay, so now I think we're cleaned up. Okay, so we've got our chord, so now we need to get the notes from the chord. So this is another thing that we can use tonal for. So if we go back to tonal, we can use the key to create the chords for the key. And then if we want to figure out what notes are in a chord, we can use the chord package. So if we look in here, we can see Tonal.js /chord. And in here, you can get a chord based on the string and then the tonic. So the tonic refers to the scale that the chord should be in. So if we want to get, for example, the major seventh chord with G4 as the tonic and B4 as the root, we can use this. But we can also just get a chord directly, something like this, chord.get, and we know the whole chord, C major 7. So that's what we're going to use. That one is a little bit easier, and that'll give us some information about the chord. So we know the chord. Let's get some information. So let's display the note up here. And now we're going to say or actually first let's just log it. So let's console.log tonal.chord.get. and then we're going to get this chord that we're going through. So now if we run this again, you can see it's an object. We can't see all the information in here. Let's see if this is working now for some reason. No, it's not working. What if I just say tone.start in here? Okay, now it's working. So there's something wrong with how the thing is loading tone, but whatever. Okay, so if we look at what's inside of a chord, it has a bunch of stuff in it. It has the name of the chord. It has the notes. That's the main thing that we want. And then it has some other stuff, the quality, the symbol, the tonic of the chord, and then intervals. It has a bunch of information in here, but really all we need here are these notes. So let's get that. So let's say let notes equals uh, tonal.chord.get chord.notes. Okay, so that's going to give us the notes from the chord. So now if I just log the notes, we'll just see the notes that we want to play. Okay, so there's the notes of each chord as it's going through our loop. And so we just want to play those notes. The problem is that we don't have an octave, right? These are just the notes, the basic notes of a chord. So we can either choose an octave to play everything in, or we can randomize the octave. Depending on the sound you want, either one is fine. But the problem is that we have to apply the octave to all of the notes. So I'm going to show you guys a really simple JavaScript function called a map function. So this is, if you remember map from P5, this is a little bit different than that. So let's just look at it real quick. And if uh, you've probably never seen this before, I would guess, but I'll show you how it works, and then we can just use it in this instance. It's actually not this. Here it is. Okay. So a map function takes an array and then it does uh, some function or some property on all of the elements of the array. So in this example, you can see the array has 4 numbers in it, 1, 4, 9, 16. And inside this map function, basically you take the array or list and then you say dot map and then you take each element and assign it to a variable. So in this case it's x. So 1 is going to be x, 4 is going to be x, 9 is going to be x, 16 is going to be x. And then on the other side of this arrow, this is called an arrow function, we say how we want to transform this value. So it's saying x times 2. So it's just multiplying everything times 2. So the result of this is 1 times 2 is 2, 4 times 2 is 8, 9 times 2 is 18, 16 times 32 is 32. So if we want to do some simple transformation to every element of a list, the map function is an easy way to do that. So what we can do here, so what this will look like, I'll log it first. I'll say notes.map, and let's get an octave first. So let's say let octave equal get random octave. Oh, I don't know if we have one of those actually. Do we? Um, no, we have a random note, a random duration, and that's it. So let's make a new function, get random octave. There's not a lot of code in this. You could just put it right in there, but whatever. So let's say const octave equals random octaves, and then return the octave. So we'll get a random octave. We don't have that many options for our octaves. So remember, we just have 2, 3, or 4 just to kind of keep it simple. And you could actually, simplify it even further. You could just play everything in one octave if you want. So we're going to get a random octave, and then we're going to map our notes. So we're going to map n for note, and we're just going to say n plus octave. So that'll give us notes with the octave as part of it. So if you look at the outputs now, we have C#2, E2, G2, B2. So now we have something that Tone.js understands from tonal. So that's the one tricky part, is that we have to take our chord and convert it into something that Tone.js understands. So now let's change our notes. So I'm going to say notes equals notes. One thing to know with this map function is it doesn't change the original array. It just gives you the result. So we have to assign the result of this back to our original array, or else, we'll just have made this, but then we're not doing anything with it. So now we have our notes, and so with our polysynth, we can play an array of notes instead of just a single note. Okay, so now we should actually be able to hear this work. Oh, whoops. All right, let's see if we can see what's happening. Oh, it says invalid arguments to set value at time. Huh, these seem like valid arguments. I wonder what synth.trigger. Oh, did I not change? I probably didn't change. Yeah, okay. So when I copy this over, I didn't change the FM synth, so this is a good reminder. We need a polysynth to play multiple notes. There we go. So there we go. We can play a sequence of chords instead of just, a melody. And so with those chords, as I mentioned before, right now we're playing the full chord, so we're articulating every aspect of the chord. But if we want to, we could do more interesting stuff. So we could take out, just the third. We could take out, random notes. So you could add more in here instead of just playing all the chords. But since it's almost 7 already. I think let's see if there's so let's do one really quick thing to kind of randomize this. Let's do something. Let's do another actually transformation. Instead of a map, let's use a filter. So a filter is like a map, but it takes a parameter that it will either include or not include one of the notes. So let's take a note and let's just use a random number. So I'll just say random between 0, let's do random 1, which is just random, and we can round this. And so if this is 0 or 1, if this is 0, it should filter out um, the note, and if it's 1, it should keep the note. I'm pretty sure that will work. Let's test it real quick. Let's go over here. Let's refresh this. Okay, let's say if we had an array with A, B, and C, and we said A dot filter, uh, let's just call this I, and then we can just say math dot round, math dot random. Yeah, that should work. So it'll just give us a couple of random notes. Not super fancy, but using the filter is kind of like using the map, except instead of transforming every object, we add a filter in here, which decides whether or not the notes get to stay in our note list. So let's console.log what notes made it through. And so now we'll get something a little bit different with some random notes. So that's kind of cool. So you can see by adding in harmony and chords, we get a lot more expressiveness. We get a lot more kind of like feelings and emotions that are kind of associated with these relationships between the notes when they're played together as opposed to when they're played in melody. There's a little bit of a different relationship that's occurring. So yeah, you don't have to add this last filter bit in here. Let me comment this out and just put uh, choose random notes. You could also just only use like, the first note and the last note or do other things, but this is always going to give us 4 notes from our chord that we can manipulate in whatever way that we want. And yeah, you can just play the first note and just have the melody, or you can play the chord only if it's, the fifth chord in the key. There's a lot of different ways that you could kind of change that to change the outcome that you get. Um, okay, so I'm gonna clean this up a little bit and try to figure out why the first version wasn't working correctly. But I'll put a link to this one in the voice chat as well. Um, and actually, yeah, I'll just delete the other one because they're basically the same thing. And the only other thing that I think I didn't copy over is the library link. So I'll put that in our new one that works for some reason and save this. And yeah, that's it. So as I mentioned before, there's a lot more you can do with harmony. There's a lot more complexity when it comes to music theory. But just in terms of adding a little bit of harmony, adding some chords, and being able to play those along with our sequence or with other notes, this is a relatively easy way to achieve that. Just get a key. You could randomize this key if you wanted, get some chords, and then as we go through our sequence, get the notes from those chords and choose an octave to play them at, and then map them to that octave. And finally, we play our notes in with our synth. So I'm going to stop the recording here, and then